thank you all for being here this evening. And are we glad it's not snowing? And it did stop raining, so that's good. I'm so happy you're here, and I appreciate your support. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay. The singer, so I can always speak up. Or I can start singing. So, Lititz Moravian Collegium Musicum history you can hear. Not yet. The inaugural concert of the newly revived Lititz Moravian Collegium Musicum took place on September 16, 2018. Billed as Lancaster County's newest yet oldest chamber orchestra and inspired to bring our motto, History You Can Hear, to life, selected professional musicians from South Central Pennsylvania and beyond gathered to recreate a unique facet of cultural life in early Lititz. Our goal was for everyone, performers and audience alike, to take a musical journey back to 18th century Lititz via our new musical time machine. I'd like to show you a brief video of the opening moments of the concert, featuring J.C. Bach's Sinfonia in D major, which captures the excitement of this maiden voyage. Perhaps as you listen to this delightful music, you too will be transported to another time and place. Regardless, one can't help but be impressed that the early American Moravians who performed this repertoire were incredibly skilled and capable musicians. The inaugural concert met with tremendous success, musically, administratively, even financially. Despite poor weather, a large and enthusiastic audience attended the concert and proved that there is indeed an interest in and appetite for the performance of early music in the area. Proud to say that this event was held in the New Year's Eve section of the LNP, that's Lancaster's local newspaper, as one of the county's top 10 musical moments of 2018. Certainly, all involved with this project were motivated and excited to continue our work together. We have since performed 2 other concerts and are rapidly approaching our 4th, which takes place in just over 2 weeks. This evening, therefore, I would like to summarize some of the research related to the Collegium, share some highlights from concerts in order to breathe musical life into the research, and, in a shameless plug, discuss some of the repertoire to be featured in our March 8th concert, Beethoven and Friends, a celebration of the 250th anniversary of Beethoven's birth, Collegium style. My interest in Collegium-related research was inspired while writing a book about the anthems of Moravian pastor and eventual bishop Johannes Herbst, composed while he lived and worked in Lititz from 1791 to 1811. During a publishing delay, my editor, Sarah Irely, suggested I expand the preface with more contextual information related to Herbst's anthems. As I dove into the music history of the Lititz congregation, the significance of the Collegium Musicum immediately emerged. First, though, let's begin with a general discussion of terminology. In Europe, Collegia Musica, which is plural of Collegium Musicum, and Collegium seems to be the proper way to pronounce it, but everyone likes to say Collegium. But then they also like to say Herbst. So, whatever you prefer. Collegium Musica were associations organized for performance of chamber and chamber orchestral music in various German towns, especially Hamburg and Leipzig during the first half of the 18th century. J.S. Bach, for example, was a member of the Collegium Musicum in Leipzig. While at first mainly associated with German universities, hence their Latin name, they have remained a feature of universities throughout the world to the present day. From 1780 until 1820, it was also very much in vogue at the European courts to employ a wind ensemble to perform what was known as Harmonie Musik. These groups served as a kind of record player as they performed arrangements of the popular repertoire of the day, including operas, symphonies, ballet music, and sonatas for piano. And still, another kind of Collegium Musicum, as described by Nola Reed Knaus in her book, The Music of the Moravian Church in America, denotes ensembles composed of amateur musicians organized for the entertainment of themselves and their friends. Quote, these groups reflected the rising educated middle class and occupied a position between institutionalized church music and the music of princely courts. Hence, the term Collegium Musicum was not precisely defined, and Collegia Musica differed in size, in social status, in level of musical training and accomplishment, in choice of music, and in the degrees of privacy or public appeal in their performances. In general, though, they all met regularly to rehearse and or perform in a relatively informal setting, and guests were welcome. Close quote. Beautifully written. Knaus also notes the importance of Collegium Musica in Moravian settlement congregations throughout the European continent and beyond. As she writes, quote, Moravians took with them their choir system, their schedule of daily and weekly worship, and the need for a Collegium Musicum. Generally, within a very few years of the establishment of a new congregation town, its diary makes mention of the Collegium Musicum, often associated with the Single Brethren's choir, unquote. The Lititz settlement followed this practice closely, as early Moravians who settled the area brought their strong musical tradition with them from Europe. Harold Shurtleff explains this fascinating practice as a, quote, transit of civilization. In his classic book on American architecture, The Log Cabin Myth, he explains that when, quote, a large body of people possesses a relatively higher culture and move to another distant area inhabited by people of a different and, to the newcomer, less sophisticated civilization, the immigrants attempt to preserve in their new world as much as possible the manners, customs, folkways, language, literature, arts, and crafts of their former home, unquote. Obviously, this transit of civilization is evident in just about every socio-cultural facet of early American Moravian life. How many can you name? Anybody?
Well-defined trades and professions.
Good. They brought their trades and professions with them. Tom.
Architecture.
All of a sudden it feels like Jeopardy. You have to make your answer in the form of a question.
What is architecture?
Right, I was thinking architecture, dress, other customs,
Language.
hardware,
Language.
music, art, painting, just about everything you can think of. When we look at them now, we're like, wow, it looks so European. That's that transit of civilization that they brought with them to feel more comfortable here. According to the Lititz congregation's earliest written history by Bishop Matthias Hale, quote, a small music account was set up and a collection taken for instruments, strings, etc. in 1768. This is considered the genesis of the Lititz Collegium Musicum. As in Europe, the Collegium provided the settlement's accomplished amateur instrumentalists the opportunity to rehearse and perform for practice, entertainment, and enlightenment. Yet, as fundamental to their faith, these musicians also gathered regularly to enhance worship with music. The dual purpose of the Lititz Collegium thus strengthened the musicians' skills in order to perform the intricately composed repertoire used in worship services. Yet, it also satisfied the community's continual desire for leisurely music making. Such goals related to entertainment and instruction were compatible with the Moravian views of music as expressed by Christian Latrobe and others in their writings. Since there was generally no dividing line between the sacred and the secular, all of life was liturgical, Michael Johns explains in his DMA dissertation for Temple University, Kalauf and his contributions to Moravian music, quote, activities with no direct spiritual meaning, such as practice and performance of secular instrumental music, could be viewed as an endeavor undertaken in the spirit of devotion that ideally marked all aspects of Moravian life, because labor, leisure, and the sacred were all seen as elements of devotion. Instrumental music and song were encouraged and used in all activities and segments of society. If you haven't done so, you really should read the chapter about Collegium Musica in Nola's book, because that quote came from that book, and she really says just about everything that needs to be said in Collegium Musica. So thankful for that chapter of Nola. With time, and as society evolved into the 19th century, both in Europe and America, an increased emphasis on professionalism led to a shift in terminology. Public performances came to be called concerts, and the performing groups, academies, or societies rather than simply collegium. Hence, the Lititz Collegium was the core of what would become, perhaps as early as 1815, the Lititz Philharmonic Society, and even later, the Lititz Band. The same thing happened here with the Bethlehem Philharmonic and Nazareth also. This was all common practice. The major academic focus of today's Lititz Collegium Musicum is to research, edit, and perform historic collegium repertoire from the late 18th to the early 19th centuries. However, we strive to approach this endeavor with energy, enthusiasm, freshness, and an overall quality that promotes a public interest and value that is current, relevant, successful, and accessible to all. In reference to a recent Collegium concert where she shared an archives and museum moment, yet again, the Reverend Nola Reed Canals, director of the Moravian Music Foundation, put it best when she said, quote, one measure of a tradition's vitality is the new manifestations it generates. This upcoming event shows the breadth and depth of Lititz's musical heritage, which has never faltered through the centuries. but continues in an unbroken line of excellence and joy, unquote. As the founder of the all-new Lititz Collegium and also a member of the Moravian Music Foundation Board of Trustees, my goal here is to actualize the Foundation's mission as well, which is, quote, to preserve, share, and celebrate Moravian musical culture, unquote. I am so blessed and so happy to be part of this synergetic situation. As most of you know, the Lititz Collegium Musicum score collection is housed here in the vaults of the Moravian Music Foundation in the Moravian Archives in Bethlehem. Altogether different than the Lititz Congregation Collection, which contains music that was meant for use in worship, the Collegium collection consists of repertoire meant for use outside of worship. I like to think of it as what the musicians played the other 6 days of the week. Specifically, Collegium repertoire includes larger instrumental and choral works, as well as chamber music for strings and winds, illustrative of the cutting edge of European musical culture of this period. Compositions by early American Moravian composers are also found in this collection. Genres and styles vary greatly. Pieces for wind instruments, as mentioned earlier, are well represented and are called Parthen or Harmonie Musik. Instrumentation is typically 5 to 8 instruments, usually oboes, clarinets, bassoons, and horns. There is also an impressive selection of vocal works. So I've given you a copy of our last program that we had in October, and inside that program there's a handout that shows you the repertoire that we have performed for the past 2 years. And so if you want to take a look at that at your leisure, you can sort of see the variety of genres that we have in our concerts that represent the collection. And it's really kind of a lot of music that we've done, and we're very proud of that. Most interesting, though, are compositions that feature string orchestra by composers now relatively forgotten, like Karl Stamitz, Paul Renitzky, or Audubon Girovitz. These composers and their works were very popular at the time and set the stage for the modern orchestra and its repertoire. Of course, works by those titans of the period who have now overshadowed all the others and are most familiar to us today, Haydn, Mozart, and Beethoven, are also well represented in the collection. Our new chamber orchestra specializes in live performances of this repertoire, most of which is not available in modern editions and therefore must be newly edited in order to be performed. Now, you might wonder exactly what is meant by editing and what specifically is involved in transforming these fragile antique scores into printed music employed in modern performance. Since our focus is on the authentic musical scores found in the original Collegium collection, in both hand-copied manuscripts or contemporary published editions, new scores based on the originals need to be faithfully reconstructed. In brief, the process works something like this. First, I use my home computer to search the Gemeincat database provided online by the Moravian Music Foundation. The entire catalog for the Lititz Collegium score collection is available and accessible online with this tool, which makes it convenient to explore composers and repertoire, choose appropriate titles, obtain the necessary catalog numbers, and ultimately plan very interesting programs. After forwarding this information to Gwen Michaels via email, everyone knows Gwen, who dutifully removes boxes and boxes of scores and places them on a cart, I'll arrive here in the morning at the Moravian Archives reading room, ready to go. Say hi to Paul, Tom, it's just so great to be here. During the typically productive visit, after saying hi to everyone and thanking them for their help, I'll root around the boxes, find what I need, and take pictures of all the scores with my iPad, usually departing in the late afternoon with tired fingers from clicking about 700 photos total on a typical visit. The next step is to enter every single note from each individual part This is something people don't always realize when you're listening to all those notes go by, especially in this style. Enter every single note from each individual part into a finale file, that's the music software, to create a digital full score, from which each part is then prepared carefully for ease of performance, including, for example, adding bowings and articulation marks, and then carefully checking for consistency between parts. Each individual part is then extracted into a separate file for each instrument. Hard copies are printed for the musicians, and finally, all the music is distributed via snail mail to the entire orchestra. Players receive their scores at least 3 weeks in advance in order to learn and practice their parts. Remember, the majority of this music is completely unknown and unfamiliar to our musicians. An aspect of this project that they absolutely love, by the way. They've never played these pieces. They think it's important. But which also stresses the necessity of hiring the best instrumentalists possible and trusting they'll practice and prepare well for this gig, because there's only a 2.5-hour rehearsal before the concert. So they really have to come knowing their stuff. Along with this musicological and editing work, logistically speaking, I have a leadership board that assists with the myriad details associated with completing such a project, including but not limited to approval from the church boards, contracting and hiring the orchestra, preparing the string parts, working on communication and publicity, including the production of posters and programs by my wife, Julie. Thank you, dear. That's a beautiful program that you're holding. The all-important fundraising endeavors with members of the congregation, and we now have business sponsors, including Moravian Manor, in order to support the all-professional orchestra, press releases and interviews, requesting volunteers to prepare and serve the meal, etc., etc. Doesn't that sound familiar, Paul? Kind of like what you do. A lot of administrative stuff. Finally, when the much-anticipated concert day arrives, the orchestra typically meets for the first time at 3:00 p.m., rehearses for 2.5 hours, enjoys a delightful dinner together, and then presents a concert that evening. I'm thinking we shouldn't really be calling these concerts. It really should be called a gathering, because it's a collegium gathering. Remember, a concert's relatively new. Concerts sound like you should have more practice. So this is a collegium gathering. The result of this work can be seen in the printed program distributed earlier from our concert last October. The typical concert usually lasts about 75 minutes with a brief intermission, and includes repertoire highlighting the variety of genres included in the Collegium score collection, which we'll sample in a moment. Organ music is also performed on the 1787 Tannenberg organ, including hymns in which all participate, so everyone feels a part of the Collegium experience, and perhaps other songs or anthems. There are other aspects of our performances that are gatherings that are non-traditional in terms of typical concerts that you're used to, yet completely appropriate for traditional collegium gatherings. Seating in the round and in close quarters makes for a more intimate connection between musician and listener. Audience members feel as though they're really a part of the ensemble. They develop a personal rapport with the players. They get to know them. They smile, they clap. They're like communicating with each other, even when they're playing sometimes. And the audience remains thoroughly engaged with the music. I keep waiting for someone to pick up an instrument and start playing. An archives and museum moment of sharing satisfies an educational facet of the event, where guest speakers present a show and tell of sorts to introduce rare instruments found in the Lititz Congregation Museum. Past presenters have included Craig Crydell, our resident serpentist from South Carolina, who travels up for this because he's so into the project. It is South Carolina, right? And the first concert, he played the congregation serpent horn, the original horn, and then his own serpent horn, so you could hear the difference between the two. And Nola Reed Canals, who played one of our historic flutes. As I just mentioned, both musicians compared the historic instruments to their own modern equivalents, which clearly emphasize how technological advancements through the years have transformed our sonic landscape. The next concert will promote our John Antis viola, the first instrument of its kind made in America. I saw a picture of it earlier. And, yes, you guessed it, the Antis cello, which recently spent some time here in the room next door. These two instruments will be together again. What a match made in heaven. Okay, so now it's time to, what I like to say, put some music where my mouth is. Let's see what all of this music we've been talking about sounds like. Aren't you dying to know? You know the history behind it, you know the context. What's the actual music sound like? So the first piece is Karl Stamitz. He was a German composer of Czech descent. He was in the second Mannheim School, which is like the earliest kind of orchestral music like we would think of as orchestral music. And this is an excerpt from his Sinfonia in A. Certain structure, like I recognize that from hearing it before. You can sort of hear the map. Smile on your face, this music, don't you think? And again, it's impressive if you imagine early American Moravians playing this in the area. It's incredible that they had these skills. And again, remember, that's a forgotten composer. Nobody knows this piece. But it's very delightful and deserves to be heard. One thing the instrumentalists really like about these concerts is they are featured more as solo artists or playing in duets. Especially these delightful clarinet duets by Grenzer, and we have two really fine clarinetists. So listen to it. So there's this chamber music that's in between the symphonic things and the hymns. So there's constantly changing of timbres and sounds. You can tell her enjoyed playing this, right? You can just hear it. So that's Grenzer. I don't know much about him, I'm sorry to say. We need to do more research in that area, but it's a delightful, fun duet. Now, everyone kind of knows who Mozart is, so now we're one of the titans that I was talking about. This is a flute duet, and I've talked to flutist friends, and they don't know these pieces. Listen carefully to how Mozart's idea of what to do with the duet differs from Grenzer's, and you start getting the idea of the genius of these composers and why they just blew everybody else out of the water. Like, where did that come from? It goes like, wow. Unpredictable. That movement goes on for another 3 minutes or so. So he had the same materials that Grenzer had, but he did a lot more with those materials. Imagination, creativity, genius. Okay, J.C. Beckler. Raise your hand if you're Moravian. We have Moravians in the, the most famous hymn is? Sing Hallelujah. So this is one of his Parthias, and basically wind ensemble piece for a small chamber orchestra. It's a theme and variations. So I'm going to let this one play for a bit, because you have to listen to the musical story that's taking place. The clarinet begins by playing the theme, then there's variations on the theme, and the clarinetist and the bassoonist have a competition of who can play the most notes the fastest. that delightful? I know I like singing Hallelujah too, but that is really kind of interesting to listen to. Okay, these are very brief marches. Military marches were very popular in Lititz. They loved to play these. So Aus Wallenstein, and then 2 marches by Bechler, see the thematic connection, and then Washington's march. And the choir is marching off the risers at this point, so that's why you hear footsteps. Washington's march. Sounds more early American. Notice the Aus Wallenstein was the transit of civilization. Wrote that one from Europe. This one's American. Delightful, don't you think? So I'd like to close the listening portion with this is little uncommon Collegium concerts because they're usually mostly instrumental with solo vocalists is what we've been doing. But in the fall, for those of you that belong to the Moravian Historical Society, we gave a talk on the Herbst Lititz anthems, and so we included some Herbst anthems in the Collegium concert, which was great because we had this full instrumentation, so we could do the larger Herbst anthems. This anthem is one of Herbst's last. It's one of his largest, and you can really hear early 19th century Herbst compared to late 18th century Herbst. This is like Herbst on steroids from what we were used to. This is the Millersville Choir, and it was very challenging for them because the tessitura is rather high for the sopranos, as you'll hear. He does have an ear for melody, though. It's such a tuneful anthem. Sheriff's Anthem is usually about 2 minutes, that one's more like 4. His final voice was quite strong and very joyful. So I'd just like to end with that shameless plug that I told you about earlier. So if you like what you heard and you want to hear more, March 8th is our next concert. It's in Lititz, 7 p.m. We're celebrating the 250th anniversary of the birth of Ludwig van Beethoven, by having the first half of the concert be all this music that set the context for Beethoven. So it includes Haydn, who was one of young Beethoven's composition teachers, Paul Wranitzky, who was a Moravian Czech Austrian composer, who was highly respected by Mozart, Haydn, and Beethoven, and it's a hunting piece. Oh, by the way, the press release is the second page of the handout, and the program for the concert is the very last page. And so that's like Czechoslovakian hunting music, very interesting. And then it's all about Gierovitz, who lived from 1763 to 1850. So think of the history that he saw and how the world changed. Another Czech-Viennese composer, popular at the time, and he was actually a pallbearer at Beethoven's funeral in 1827. So he knew Beethoven. This is the music Beethoven listened to and perhaps were models for him. Then we have the antis viola and the cello, and then the second half is all Beethoven. The third movement of Beethoven's second, the second movement of Beethoven's seventh, in a harmonie musique arrangement that Craig Kreidel introduced to me, which has a serpent horn part, and then the final movement of Beethoven's Symphony No. 2. And then of course we end with the hymn With Everybody Ode to Joy. So I hope you can make the concert. Thank you very much for your patience this evening. I'm sorry that I went over a bit. Thank you for staying.